Good morning. This is part 3 of my series on scientific evidence that supports astrology. And today I want to look at some evidence from statistics. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And as usual, I need to get rid of a few panels here so that I can see what I'm doing. Okay, and now I think we're ready to go. Evidence from statistics. All righty. Two of the leading researchers in statistical and evidence-based astrology today are David Cochran and Robert Curry. David is CEO of Cosmic Patterns that produces the Kepler and Sirius astrology programs. He has a master's degree in data analysis, and he has been a pioneer in the use of statistics and extreme case sampling to produce an evidence-based astrology. He is also a founding member of the Cosmobiology Institute that is dedicated to scientific research on the relationships between cosmic phenomena and organic life. Meanwhile, Robert Curry is an astrologer and software designer who is also a very fine statistician, and he is the current editor of Correlation, a publication of the Astrological Association, formerly the Astrological Association of Great Britain. This magazine presents rigorous, peer-reviewed statistical and quantitative evidence for astrology. And while most of the studies that follow represent research done by non-astrologers, I've also included a few results from both David Cochran and from Correlation. Also, note that most astrological influences are likely weak to moderate in strength, because if they weren't, then we wouldn't be able to mitigate the outcomes through free will. They're not like jumping out of a plane where we have no choice but to accelerate at a rate of 32 feet per second squared due to gravity. Additionally, a single astrological influence can manifest in several possible ways, and a single outcome can be the result of any of several different astrological causes. All of this makes it more difficult, but not impossible, to assess astrology using statistics. In many ways, an astrological influence is like a quantum wave function that contains all possible outcomes with probabilities assigned to each. Or, as Dr. Rick Tarnas likes to say, astrology is archetypally predictive, but not concrete predictive. Also, while we often do find statistical evidence for traditional astrology, it's often not what one would expect. For example, David Cochran examined the assumption that Mercury-Uranus aspects are more prevalent in astrologers' charts, and this turned out to be true. But it was semisextiles and quincunxes that mattered the most, while sextiles and trines had the lowest frequency of all. Not at all what most astrologers would expect. And you can see a graph here from one of David Cochran's studies. You get to around 30 degrees. You find aspects close to that in the charts of several astrologers, and you find another peak over here at 150 degrees. But when it comes to 60 degrees or 120 degrees, those are low points. Okay, let's now look at some studies. And I just love the title of this study, published in 2016. Are Children Like Werewolves? Full moon and its association with sleep and activity behaviors in an international sample of children. Okay, this cross-cultural study found a small but significant effect of the full moon on sleep. All in all, children sleep about 5 minutes less at a full moon as compared to sleep at a new moon. And why is this important for astrology? Well, even though the effect is small, just 5 minutes less of sleep, this study is important for astrology because it supports traditional astrological theory regarding how things are intensified at a full moon. Next, in 2013, there was a study published titled Evidence That the Lunar Cycle Influences Human Sleep. And this was more comprehensive. Researchers found that for adults sleeping under controlled laboratory conditions during full moon, that delta brain waves decreased by 30%, The time needed to fall asleep increased by 5 minutes. The length of sleep time decreased by 20 minutes. Endogenous melatonin levels decreased. Participants reported diminished quality of sleep. Why is this important for astrology? Well, these results are much more definitive than those of the previous study that examined the sleep of children during the full moon. And these results are important to astrology because they provide several objective measures that people are more restless during the full moon, just as astrology believes. Furthermore, the study was done under controlled conditions where subjects were not exposed to moonlight, and they were not even aware of the purpose of the study. And you can see from the graph over here that during the full moon, subjective sleep quality was down, total sleep time was up. The time it took to reach a stage called REM sleep latency was up. Deep slow wave sleep was down. Sleep EEG delta activity was down, and melatonin levels were down. Next, we have the dark side of the moon. This study found that hospital patients are more likely to exhibit disturbed behavior during a full moon. And why is this important for astrology? Again, it's important for astrology because it confirms the kind of behavior that astrology expects to be more prevalent during a full moon. As you can see, a lot of the studies that are published by non-astrologers in medical journals, many of these have to do with cycles of the moon. And here's another one, published in 2020, Lunar Cycle in Psychiatric Hospital Admissions for Schizophrenia. New findings from Henan Province, China. And this study found that hospital admissions for schizophrenia are significantly more likely, with a probability less than 1 in 10,000 at the full moon and the first quarter moon. Why is this result important for astrology? Well, it's important because it reaffirms, once again, traditional associations of the full moon with lunacy, but it also shows that the waxing square of the moon is also an important indicator. And that's not necessarily expected. Additionally, even though it wasn't significant, at the third quarter moon, which is the waning square, there were also more psychiatric admissions for schizophrenia. It just did not reach that level of, that usual level of statistical significance, but it was elevated. Okay, moon sun suicide. A study published in 2018. This study showed that women in a certain age group have a heightened risk of suicide during full moons, magnetic storms, and proton solar events. Why is this important for astrology? Well, it's important not only because it confirms yet again some traditional suspicions regarding the full moon, but it alerts us to gender differences in how people may react. And it shows that disturbances to Earth's geomagnetic sphere can play a role. So this is really interesting. We don't often think too much about gender differences, but this study shows that such things can exist. The next study, published in 2017, was the full moon and motorcycle-related mortality, population-based double control study. And this study found that motorcycle fatalities were more likely during the full moon. Why is this result important for astrology? Well, again, it's important because it is along the lines of what astrology might expect during the full moon. Okay, this one is going to be a little different. Published in 2000, World Cup soccer players tend to be born with sun and moon in adjacent signs. And this study not only found that exceptional soccer players tend to be born with sun and moon in adjacent signs, it also notes that for each of the aspects by sign of semisextile, sextile, the number of soccer players for each waxing aspect correlates strongly with the number for each corresponding waning aspect. Why is this important for astrology? Well, it's important because it not only provides some justification for the traditional Ptolemaic aspects, it also yields a rather significant but unexpected result regarding the placement of the sun and the moon in champion soccer players. And here you can see that almost a quarter of these champion soccer players had sun and moon a semisextile relationship by sign. That means they were in adjacent signs. And we also see that the number making a waxing semisextile, it was comparable to those that had a waning semisextile. And similarly for the sextile, the squares, both waxing and waning, the trine waxing and waning, and the quincunx waxing and waning. There wasn't really any statistically significant difference between, for a given aspect, the number that had that aspect waxing and the number that had that aspect waning. Now we'll look at some work that was begun by Hans Eysenck, an empirical study of the relation between astrological factors and personality. And I remember when this study was done. In 1978, psychologist Hans Eysenck did a study that initially found that introverts are more likely to have their sun in earth and water signs, while extroverts are more likely to have their sun and air and fire signs. Unfortunately, these findings were later deemed inconclusive as a result of too many of the subjects having detailed knowledge of astrology. That biased the results. People may have been answering questions in the way they felt they were supposed to be answering them. Follow-up studies that controlled for prior knowledge of astrology, looking at just the sun, did not find this effect. However, a study published in 1996 by Clark as a follow-up to the original Eysenck study on astrology and extroversion, introversion, found that people born with both sun and moon in positive signs, fire or air, are significantly more likely to be extroverted than people born with both in negative signs, earth and water. Furthermore, a study by Robert Curry that appeared in Correlation paired keywords from the Eysenck personality inventory with each of the astrological elements and showed that fire signs tend to be extroverted, earth signs are introverted, air signs tend toward emotional stability, and water signs do not appear to be well identified by the Eysenck personality inventory, the EPI. Additionally, separate studies by M. Gauquelin, F. Gauquelin, and Eysenck, and Cochrane and Fink confirm that people with Mars or Jupiter recently rising or culminating tend to be more extroverted as compared to those with Saturn recently rising or culminating. Together, the studies by Clark, Curry, Gauquelin, and Cochrane provide both confirmation and clarification of traditional astrological theory. And now we get to the Mars effect. This is from the Wikipedia, and the most famous statistical study of an astrological effect is what's commonly known as the Mars effect, that was discovered by psychologist and statistician Michel Coquelin. This study found Mars appearing more often just after rising or culminating in the charts of sports champions. Now, as expected, many scientists were skeptical of the Mars effect, and they pinpointed what they felt might be flaws in the analysis. However, Gauquelin and others addressed each of these possible flaws, and the Mars effect has endured. Also, his study has been replicated at least 7 times, and the results were positive in 6 out of 7 of those studies. In the 1990s, statistician Philippe Ertel did a thorough review of Gauquelin's data, and he found several patterns within the data that are extremely unlikely to be due to chance. His work confirmed the Mars effect, but also raised new questions. There's a Saturn effect for eminent scientists, but it mysteriously weakens when you look at the most eminent scientists. And finally, I want to end this section with another reference to the work of David Cochran. He is perhaps the leading expert today on harmonic and midpoint astrology, also known as vibrational astrology. And he has been very successful in developing and testing sophisticated astrosignatures for a variety of conditions. His latest discovery is a statistically verifiable astrosignature for bipolar disorder, and the entire body of his work provides a blueprint for the future of statistical and evidence-based astrology. Okay, that is the end of that. And let's see. Here we go. I'll stop sharing my screen now. And I'm back. Okay, well, that's it for my review of just some of the evidence from statistics that supports astrology. And as everyone who has delved into this sees, we find that some of the beliefs of traditional astrology are supported, while at the same time, we find some surprises, which challenge us to think about how traditional astrology can explain these thoughts. And that way, we hopefully expand our understanding of traditional astrology, and sometimes we add to it. So, well, I've got a little bit more to go in this multi-part look at scientific evidence that supports astrology. And the next video I do will present a little bit of evidence from mundane astrology. Okay, that's it for now. So long. I hope to see you again.